And welcome back. Here we go, part two, looking at the Chinese Civil War. This section examines World War II, how it was fought in China, how the GMD participated, and how the CCP participated, and ultimately what the impact is on the course of the Chinese Civil War. This video is a little long, I know, but that's because it has a bunch of other video clips in it. And I need you guys to not skip ahead, but to actually watch these these video clips, because they are providing you with information. Seriously, you guys, it's amazing. Okay, let me not take it that far, but here we go. All right, so the previous video clip gave you some information about the invasion of Manchuria, and that should already have started you thinking about, how might this not work out for the GMD? And then the other reason why you watch that clip, hopefully, is because it reviews some of the information that we already know, hopefully, about the interwar period and what was going on. So now we're going to talk about World War II, and the post is there in parentheses because we are also going to talk about the aftermath of. And as you know, World War II in Asia begins with the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937, where Japan, already controlling Manchuria, pushes further into China. So they head south from their stronghold in Manchuria. This is also when the GMD and the CCP stop fighting against each other, and you have the creation of the Second United Front. Now, Mao from the get-go was like, Mao, from the get-go, that is from the invasion of Manchuria, was calling for a laying down of arms and uniting against Japan, because the fight against Japan was more important than their fight against each other. Chiang Kai-shek, on the other hand, was willing to kind of negotiate and pacify the Japanese, because he thought that the CCP were a greater threat. His idea was to actually pacify and control the country, then he would be able to turn his attention against Japan. However, people were not terribly excited about that. Many people saw Japan as being the greater threat. Those warlords that we talked about previously, that one warlord, Zhang, rose up against Chiang Kai-shek and basically kidnapped him and forced him to agree to stop fighting against the CCP and to unite against Japan. And ultimately, the Sino-Japanese War, or World War II, is going to have a really huge negative impact on the GMD and their, the outcome, right? Essentially, Chiang didn't fight as much as he could have, and this was because he miscalculated that the U.S. would enter full force into the war in Asia. So he always thought that he could wait a little bit, and that the U.S. would come and kind of give him a huge amount of backup, because of course the U.S. is heavily involved in Europe, but that is not the case. Also, even before the U.S. got involved in Europe, they had been providing support to the GMD to fight against the communists. So that was a huge miscalculation on his part. And the invasion of China never came. So the U.S. went and invaded, massive, invasion, of course, with the European forces, but the U.S. Sent a huge number of men into Europe, like when we looked at, the Normandy and into Italy and so on and so forth, pushing eastward to drive Germany out. And Chiang was expecting a similar thing in China to drive Japan out. And the U.S. never did that. And he also hoped that the U.S.'s involvement in World War II in China would then help him against the CCP. This expectation that the U.S. would become involved kind of changed his strategies. And ultimately, the GMD had a really dismal showing fighting against Japan. And basically, he held back. He wanted to save his best men and his forces to win the final fight with the CCP. So he just knew that the CCP was going to be trouble, that the Second United Front was going to break down again, and he wanted to make sure that he would be able to have a grip over China when this war against Japan ended. Now, the result of this is that the war is going to end, and the GMD is going to be demoralized, and it's going to be discredited, and it's going to be divided. Essentially, people are really upset with the GMD that they didn't fight as hard as they could. They really, really didn't fight as hard as they could. So the CCP comes out looking like gold because they went full on, fighting the Japanese. So in a way, the CCP come out with way better nationalist street cred than the GMD did, who were supposed to be nationalists. And one of the things that people definitely wanted were these foreign actors out of their country. And with the invasion of Japan, the people who had not seen imperialism, who hadn't seen foreign actors in their country, like people living in the countryside, and so didn't really have this nationalist feeling. With World War II, Japan is there in the countryside, killing people. And so the group that actually stands up against Japan is going to receive a lot more credit. And people like Chiang emerges with like egg on his face. And a lot of the people who supported him and supported his leadership within the GMD itself are going to not anymore. So the GMD is now going to have a lot of unrest within its ranks, and a lot more people are going to be turning their attention toward the CCP. The other thing, of course, is they lost their absolute best troops. A lot of those people deserted. And when we say best troops, the most well-trained troops, a lot of them deserted because they were demoralized and went to go fight with the CCP. And then in some of the battles, because there wasn't the best planning, then again, maybe troops that should have fared better did not. And as stated previously, the communists were a lot more active in the fighting, and this is going to be really, really beneficial in helping to gain supporters for the communists and lose supporters for the GMD.
Shanghai was bombarded. There were huge civilian casualties. Nationalist troops fought hard, but they were forced to retreat. Shanghai fell in November 1937. In just 5 months, the Japanese had captured half of China's seaboard. Chiang Kai-shek and his wife appealed to the world for support.
To you, who are enjoying the serenity and security of your own homes, I wish to bring a message from the women of war-ridden China. It is this: if you wish to avoid the calamities that are befalling China now, and the killing and mutilation of your loved ones and your fellow beings, boycott Japanese goods.
The battle for the capital, Nanking, was fierce. Again, the Japanese overpowered nationalist resistance. In December 1937, the Japanese entered the city, and they began to butcher civilians. An estimated 200,000 men, women, and children were massacred. It was called the Rape of Nanking. By June 1938, Chiang was desperate. He ordered the dikes of the Yellow River broken, hoping the flood would stop the Japanese forces. The people in the area were not warned. For them, it was catastrophic. 11 cities and thousands of villages were flooded. Millions were made homeless. Hundreds of thousands died. And the Japanese continued.
Today, we, the people of the United States, fighting a desperate rear-guard action against the Japs, grimly realize that our future depends upon holding a fighting China as our ally. Well, may we ponder what might happen if China should fall, if the full force of Japan, now deadlocked in China, were released to strike into India, into Australia, into Mexico or Canada, or California.
Despite the propaganda, the Allies gave China low priority. They were struggling to survive the war in Europe. General Joseph Stilwell was named the top American commander in China. Stilwell had lived in China and he spoke the language. His job was to keep China in the war and improve its fighting capacity. He commanded Chinese troops, and he believed that, properly trained, they would be among the best in the world. But he railed against the nationalist command.
He would speak in expletives to me about the Chinese generalship because he would find them pig-headed, vacillating, they'd change their mind. And again, Jiang would not want to commit a large force to gain an objective. He would send it in driblets, and it would then be consumed by the Japanese in driblets.
Stilwell found that the Generalissimo was unwilling to commit his troops against the Japanese because he was saving them for use against the Chinese communists. He had 500,000 of his best troops blockading the area occupied by the Chinese communists.
Now, as many governments have done before, war happens, economic troubles happen, and the government is on the scene to fix it. And they fix it by printing lots and lots and lots of money. Now, it seems like a good idea to print money, but as you very well know, you print money, you increase the supply, you decrease the value, and things become much more expensive. So we have a state of hyperinflation, And then you have this hyperinflation. And then the government's like, I got another fix. And they create the gold yuan. And they encourage people to transfer to it. Now, it doesn't have anything holding it up. There's no backing to it. And it collapses. And this destroys the savings of all of those people who went into went into using the gold yuan. Remember that a really large percent of the GMD support is coming from people in the urban areas, and it's coming from people who have the money. The landlords, the industrialists, the wealthy urbanites. And so this is definitely going to undermine support, right? Because now people are losing their money. People do not like it when they lose their money. Additionally, there was a huge amount of corruption. So there will be a video clip coming up after this, that discusses the corruption as an issue. But basically, instead of the supplies that the Americans were providing going toward the war effort, a lot of it was being appropriated. That is the appropriate use of the word, by the GMD officials and selling them in the black market. So the GMD didn't get, the soldiers in the field didn't get what they were supposed to be receiving anyway. As you know, that's not going to be so good. The other thing that the GMD is doing a whole lot of stuff, y'all. A whole lot of stuff that you and me are like, this is not going to work out well. A biggie was the conscription. So the peasantry were being forced to fight in the military, but maybe even worse than that is the food, people's resources, whatever they had was being taken from them and being appropriated by the GMD. So think about what this is going to mean for the peasantry, and who do you think they're going to support?
Stilwell soon saw the Chinese war effort was hampered by another problem, corruption. It started at the top with Jiang's inner circle, his wife's family, and a handful of his oldest friends. They controlled the economy and made enormous profits from their positions. Jiang himself was never accused of corruption, but he did nothing to stop it, and it spread to all levels in the nationalist government. Those it hurt most were the ordinary soldiers Stilwell was trying to command. Conscripts were treated brutally.
They were afraid we would run away, so they would tie 5 or 6 men together on the same rope. That's how we traveled. We were strung up in groups.
I saw hundreds of our conscripts strung up and pulled along on ropes. At night, to stop them running away, they tied their legs. I saw it with my own eyes.
The
nationalists had corrupt officers. They put sand in the rice to replace what they had taken. We ate moldy rice with a lot of sand in it. They said we were drafted to fight Japan and defend our homeland. If they really meant it, why didn't they give us food and clothes?
Why was there corruption? Poverty. If America didn't have enough food and clothing, corruption would exist there too. As the Chinese saying goes, only when one has food and clothing will he know ethics.
Nearly 1.5 million men died of starvation or illness before ever reaching their units. 1 out of every 10 men drafted during the war. Stilwell and the Foreign Service officers filed reports about nationalist corruption and other problems to no avail. Nationalist censorship and the American media bolstered Jiang's image.
Well known to every American is lean, keen Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, undisputed leader and idol of 450 millions of Chinese.
In 1943, Madame Jiang visited the United States and charmed Congress and the public.
Let us not forget that Japan in her occupied areas today has greater resources at her command than Germany. Let us not forget that during the first 4.5 years of total aggression, China has borne Japan's sadistic fury unaided and alone.
She repeatedly requested huge amounts of money and supplies for the government. When the U.S. Treasury expressed reservations, Chiang threatened to sign a separate peace with Japan. And so millions of dollars were sent. No one had to account for the money, and much of it simply disappeared. The communists wanted to create a good impression, for they wanted American help in the immediate struggle against Japan, and they hoped for long-term support when the war was over. The American officers spent a year in Yan'an assessing the communists' organization and their military potential. Apart from a few Russian advisors, they saw no evidence of Soviet support. With full U.S. government approval, the Americans instructed the communists on strategy and weaponry. They watched guerrilla tactics. They traveled out from Yan'an and watched the communists attack Japanese blockhouses. They saw that the communists controlled huge areas in the countryside of North and Central China. Patrick Hurley, President Roosevelt's personal representative, visited. His mission was to mediate between Chiang and the communists. Despite cordial appearances, Hurley's mediation went badly and led to deep communist mistrust of him. Hurley supported Chiang Kai-shek and did not seem to take the communists seriously. The Foreign Service officers made a different assessment.
I reported on the communists after my visit there that I thought that they would probably win in China. And the reason I think that that would happen is that they had popular support. I mentioned, I think at the time, that they were a democratic force. That was a misnomer. They were a popular force, and they had a popular support. And only in that sense were they democratic.
Relations between Chiang and Stilwell were deteriorating. Stilwell, on behalf of the American government, demanded that Chiang make sweeping changes in his army.
Stillwell talked about the bad things in Chiang's government and Chiang's arrogance. He also asked that part of Chiang's troops be placed under his direct control and that Americans be appointed high-ranking officers. Chiang Kai-shek did not accept that. But all those were not the main disagreements. The biggest disagreement was that Stilwell wanted to send weapons to the communists, to arm communist troops, which was the last thing Chiang Kai-shek wanted.
Chiang demanded Stilwell's recall. John Davies asked for a transfer. Almost every American officer with in-depth experience in China was fired or resigned. Chiang now had undisputed control of China's war effort. Stilwell was replaced by General Wedemeyer, who was much more sympathetic to Chiang. And the war with Japan was soon to be over. In August 1945, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and the Japanese surrendered.
And so the war ended. But during this time, the GMD continues to alienate its base. So students are always, or very often, at the forefront of wanting change, as are the intellectuals. And they had that support from that segment of the population. But the GMD and Chiang Kai-shek had moved the GMD more toward the right. Not the socialism of Chiang Kai-shek, but a more nationalism, And people want more liberal policies, and the GMD is not providing that. When World War II ended, and China gets Manchuria back, the GMD alienates people further by failing to punish the Japanese collaborators. And so basically a lot of people went scot-free, and then they went and appointed people who are not local to Manchuria to administer the area. So Chiang Kai-shek put his people in charge, not the people who are from the area, thereby alienating the people of Manchuria even further. Now, China gets Taiwan back from Japan at the end of World War II, and there's a rebellion in Taiwan because the GMD officials who went over to administer Taiwan were all kinds of corrupted. So people are like, oh, we just got rid of Japan, and then China comes back and takes us over, and it's just all kinds of corruption. There's no improvement. And now we have more social unrest, greater civil instability, and so the GMD responds with increased repression. And so this is where we stop talking about World War II, and the next part is going to be looking at what happens once the Civil War resumes. Now we get to everybody's real favorite parts. Not the surprise, but the red questions. And so, consider, how did World War II affect relations between Chiang and the U.S.? And ultimately, how do you think at this point World War II will impact the GMD's chances of winning the Civil War? And why? Take a minute, ponder, reflect, ponder. The stuff that has been spoken about previously, and see where that takes you. And then compare and contrast the role that foreign involvement plays here with the Spanish Civil War. All right. Why is there a difference? I think that's enough for now with the red questions. A little bit too much sunshine and joy for you. I know. And